First question is addressed to James. James, you said that our churches need centres where LGBTI youth can approach and be ministered to. The challenge is to train facilitators to staff those centres. Where do we start?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, I think the most important thing is about education. And I think that theme has come through very much today, and that's one thing I'm most grateful to the ACL for. People like Elizabeth and John and Martin sat here with me today. So first of all, you've got to get educated, which is why people like me and say many others here in WA who've left behind the gay lifestyle are very happy to come and help educate you to begin with. The other side of it that I want to make mention of as well, and a number of people have said this to me today, is they've come to me and said, well, but I'm not the full deal either. I'm like, no, everybody needs their sexuality redeemed. They need their intellect redeemed. They need every bit of them redeemed because we live in a fallen world. So we just want to be able to educate you sufficiently that you don't any longer feel fear about walking in truth and in mercy in a good balanced way with people who come forward and say, I feel same-sex attraction, or I'm gender questioning, or I've got 36 genders, or whatever it is that's going on in their heart and mind today, and how they feel while you stroke them. It's important that you get educated and trained enough to feel confident in those situations. We'd love to be able to help you do that in some way.
Thanks, James. Next question probably could go to James or to Elizabeth. How do you answer Christians who sincerely believe and proclaim that homosexuality is acceptable?
I would turn around and say that, well, first of all, I think the most important thing in this is stories. Whatever happens, I mentioned earlier on that we all have our own history, but then when Christ comes in, we have his story. And this is why it's important, and I'm trying to encourage as many people as possible across our nation to speak out their stories, because it's all very well to turn around and say, oh, it's not acceptable, but unless you've got something to back that up, and people can give hope and say there is a different way, and it's not just a different way, it's a much better way, until they've got those stories, people in some way won't believe what you say to them anyway. I just want to bring two particular websites to your attention. Get your pen ready. And two of those websites are as follows. One is called changedmovement.com. Changedmovement.com. There are heaps of stories of people coming out of bisexuality, lesbianism, or LGBTQIP plus 2S stuff and the rest of it. Their stories are on there. The other website is Two Prisms, TWOPRISMS.com. They're real short, sweet stories. And you can turn and say, look, these people are saying that homosexuality wasn't acceptable to them. So therefore, let's have a dialogue about it. Remember, being out there in the Aeropagus is about the discussion. In the day, oil always rises above water. So our job isn't to convince others. Our job is just to be able to present the case before other people, and we give them real life stories that they cannot turn around and say, but that's not true. It's like, sorry, it is. It's their story. So I think that is possibly the best way to go about dealing with people who want to say, well, homosexuality is acceptable. Elizabeth, anything else?
One of the things that it's a long-term project that I would like to do is to see the narrative on this changed, because saying homosexuality is okay for some people is actually the reverse of compassion.
I think the police, the way they work in Sweden is they go to these web pages and they actually follow then them and comments and so on, and find trafficking and prostitution in where they're being sold, etc. So pornography industry it's a complete different arena that also needs to be tackled, definitely.
Great, thank you. One for you, Elizabeth. Do you have examples where countries or states are moving toward legalising or decriminalising pedophilia?
I think there's a concerted campaign, particularly Canada, America, and Australia, England as well. So it's Western countries. They don't have a problem with this in Iraq or Iran. Clearly not progressive. There is quite a lot of concern that mostly when people think of pedophiles, they think of someone who's going to be easily identified, the village idiot who wears a dirty Mac and hangs out by the kiddies' playground equipment and has a sort of facial tic. But we need to replace that stereotype with quite a different picture. We need to picture someone who's a millionaire, possibly a judge or a politician, someone who looks like anybody else and is highly educated. These people are networked, and there is huge money in this. So it's a very sophisticated industry that requires people to feed it. And I think that the more you see that all of these things are linked, the more you see that this is actually just an industry that is looking to increase its market share. And they are particularly all through academia as well, and in the professional institutions. So the American Psychological Association produced DSM-5 recently, which is the sort of Bible of who's mad and who isn't, and it described pedophilia as an orientation. And there was a sort of national or international outcry because, of course, if it's an orientation, well, then it's protected by anti-discrimination law, isn't it? So you can't stop me from working in your daycare centre because I'm a virtuous pedophile and I know that that's bad, but that's just my orientation, I'm not going to act on it. And then at the same time they advance the other narrative, which is, well, how do you know it damages children? Actually, it's quite a loving thing to do. So these are the two things that are advancing at the same time. Now, the American Psychological Association then said, oh, whoops, did we say orientation? And they replaced it with another word. But you can see very clearly that this is where they're wanting to go with it. And it's exactly the trajectory that they followed for homosexuality as well. It's not based on science, it's based on activism.
Thanks. A question here that was handed to me on paper. Paper still exists in case you didn't know. If there are laws passed to protect religious freedom, will these be protection against practices of some religious groups that are violating human rights, e.g. child marriage or female circumcision, or the introduction of Sharia law into Australian society? Perhaps you, John?
Certainly, and that is a definite concern that has been raised through the whole religious freedom debate, is that in seeking to protect Christian religious freedoms, are we not then extending a protection that maybe go beyond what we think are activities and religious beliefs that ought to be protected? And I think there are two bulwarks against that. I don't think there's any way, there's not an easy answer to say, well, that's just not going to happen. I think it is a concern. We have to be careful about it. And the first one is that we have a Judeo-Christian conception of religious freedom. It's not a religious freedom, a set of principles that operates in a void. It arises out of the Christian tradition. And so it has a certain set of concepts that it recognises in relation to the manifestation and practice of belief, in joining together in associations and practicing it. And it has important limitations, and that's the second bulwark, is that it is restrained by those things which are illegal. So there are a large amount of things that might be the content of Sharia law, which are actually illegal and criminal activities. So those activities would not be engaged and be legal just by passing a religious freedom law, because they're still illegal. And so those are two key protections against a religious freedom law overextending and covering activities and beliefs which are reprehensible. But certainly there are things in the religious freedom space that are being pushed for by other religious groups, such as vilification provisions, blasphemy laws, which Christians, I don't think, should be pushing for. If people want to attack us with speech, we need the freedom to be able to speak back and talk about those things, rather than being able to prosecute people for attacking our ideas. Whereas there are other segments in religions who want that protected by vilification provisions. And certainly there needs to be care taken to ensure that that doesn't happen.
The next question here is related. Is religious freedom and freedom of expression for a Christian a thing of the past? Can we really legislate religious freedom in a godless society?
I'll take that question as well, and there's others who might want to chip in at this on this panel. I think we definitely have issues with living in a godless society that laws will not fix. There needs to be a transformation of culture. But I don't think that that is a new thing. And I think the best thing that laws do is give us the space to be able to continue to do what we need to do, which is to be going out and spreading and speaking the gospel. It's the gospel that transforms, not laws. The laws are important, but they're not the thing in itself that's going to protect religious freedom. It's going to be people using that religious freedom to then go out and transform the culture. How is the culture transformed? Romans 12, transformed by the renewing of the mind, and that's done when the gospel is preached and the Lord opens hearts.
Good, thank you. Martin, this one's for you. Martin, you talked about the tsunami of precious people damaged by gender reassignment, etc. How is the church getting ready to share God's love to these people?
Maybe that's a question for James. Look, I'm not sure that they necessarily are. I'm inclined with these sorts of questions to say, yes, there is a sense in which special expertise and special individuals can be really important. And in fact, there will be those who have come out of the transgender life early who, may actually be enabled to witness to and to be a friend to these people in a particular way. I think that God does bring us out of circumstances and make us a blessing to others that were in those circumstances. But at the end of the day, we all have to be ready to some degree, because we just encounter people and we can't control that in everyday life, and they could be from any number of backgrounds. And that is why the principles of the gospel and the principles of the Christian life are of universal application to all people. And so what we actually need more than anything is the heart for these people. We need to understand the basics of sin, of salvation, of sanctification, of change, and all these sorts of things. And they apply to people in those circumstances just as they apply to people in all circumstances. There's actually a verse, and you sprung that on me quickly, so I couldn't look it up. But it's in Isaiah 59. Can I remember it? That's a good question. And they didn't have transgender people in the Bible, but they had eunuchs. And there's a remarkable verse in Isaiah 59 which says something to the effect that, "Let not the eunuch say, I am cut off from the house of the Lord, or that I am a dry tree. Because for the eunuchs that do that which pleases me, I will give them an inheritance that is better than sons and daughters." And he's saying, that is no barrier to the kingdom of God. That is no barrier to the heart of God. That is no barrier to the gospel. And then, of course, you go over to the New Testament, and where do you see that fulfilled? Philip, right? He goes and he takes the gospel to an Ethiopian eunuch, and there's a man who's brought into the house of God. Why? Because he told him of Christ. And he expounded the book of Isaiah to him. And it's the same. And so, I don't want anyone to sit there and say, well, I don't have the expertise for this. I tell you what, you're a person, they're a person. You certainly do. Very good.
Thank you, Mark. Another one for you. What would you say the church needs to do to equip young people to rise up with more than, quoting that figure that I mentioned, that 80% leave university, leave the faith while they're going through uni?
Yeah, I think that we need to overcome our fears around young people. And one of the biggest fears we've had for a long time is if that we go too hard on them, they'll run away. They've actually run away because we've gone too easy on them. That's the reality. And you see, I learned quickly in youth ministry. I can't play sports. Got the coordination of a giraffe. I don't play Xbox. I don't watch sport. I don't know anything about pop culture. And I thought, how the heck can I be a youth leader? I dress like an old man. You know what? I just found these people were I have other qualities, it's all right. It's like I'm on a couch all of a sudden, confessing to my psychologist. But I found very quickly, that was the sort of the insecurity I had at 18. And I found very quickly that there's something that these kids were looking for, and I never would have guessed it. They were looking for an authority figure. They were looking for someone who they trusted, who knew stuff, and could help them and would do so without compromise. And do you know what? I'd usually come down on them like a ton of bricks with a severe act of discipline within the first week. And they had, you wouldn't believe it, that just made them more loyal. Because they've never experienced clarity. They've never experienced authority. They've never experienced conviction. And you know, there's a whole group of people who grew up in the 60s and the 70s and the 80s when authority and structure and truth was being cast off. And they're out there trying to talk to young people with this softly, positive kind of, insipid, be who you are, do anything you want to be, you're loved and special and wonderful, and they're walking away in droves. They want to hear, do you know what? You're a reprobate sinner, and you're full of evil, and you need to take responsibility, and you need to sort your life out, and you need God. And they want to hear structure. They want to hear worldview. They want to hear the negative as well as the positive. They want to have the discipline as well as the affirmation. They want to know that there's credibility. And I tell you what, that's why when Jordan Peterson says, make your bed, they all go, oh, yeah, I love Jordan Peterson. Stand up with your shoulders back. Oh, it's amazing. He's like my dad. You read the comments on YouTube and that's literally what they're saying. And there's kind of a tragedy in that. As much as it's kind of amusing, it's tragic. And I'd say, look, for young people, give them robust worldview. Don't shy away. Answer the hard questions. Say the hard truths. They'll respect it because they don't see it anywhere else. And somewhere deep within, they are actually searching for clarity. And they're actually searching for meaning. Thank you.
James, this one I think is probably one for you. Amazon not publishing or not allowing books to be sold from their store about people who've changed their orientation. Is there a list of books that they've banned? Is that available somewhere?
There is a list of books available. I'm trying to think exactly where I saw it at the end of. I think it's on the Voice of the Voiceless website, because they just picked up the fact that a book called Achieving Heterosexuality was banned yesterday, and a good chunk of that was my story, so Amazon clearly don't like me at the moment, that's fine. But that's one of the books. But the key books that they've taken off to begin with were books by a guy called Dr. Joseph Nicolosi, who ran a therapeutic clinic in California, and also works by a Catholic psychologist called Jared van den Aardweg, wrote a book called The Battle for Normality. They're the two leading books they began with, but then they started hacking away at lots of stories. Now, the people who are behind this haven't read any of these books. They're just saying, this makes me feel uncomfortable. I don't like the idea of this. And Amazon are kowtowing to this, like most of the great corporate, neo-fascist corporations are doing so today. The Googles and the Apples and everybody else. And that's why petitions are important. I always say, if there's an opportunity to write a letter rather than sign a petition, please do that above all. I think you can do both. But this is where, again, I love ACL about this. It's saying we've got to stand up, we've got to push back, we've got to move on the offensive in the midst of all this. Because what's happening is this morning I woke up at 6:20 from a phone call from somebody in Ghana who just managed to find my mobile number, and I'm trying to work out who's talking about the end of the phone. This is a guy with unwanted same-sex attraction who wants to get help from somebody somewhere in the world. And he's found my number. Now, normally he might be able to save up a few whatever currency is in Ghana and buy a book there, but at the moment, they're just culling these books. It takes people like us who say, no, we believe that people have the right to follow their own therapeutic journey as they choose. The challenge becomes this: is at least 10 books on Amazon that tells you how you can facilitate your own suicide. And lots of books about Satanism, but we can't have something on there that might mention about people leaving behind homosexuality and even meeting the person of Jesus in the midst of it. Please, please join us all in standing up against this.
Thank you. So Voice for the Voiceless is where...
Voice of the Voiceless, I know, I've certainly seen the list on their website.
Thank you. Question, how is the ACL currently engaging in the political process on the formulation of the Religious Freedom/Discrimination Act?
I guess that's me. We're engaging, that's for sure. A few things. So initially, we were promised a lot. All right, immediately post-election, it's going to be wonderful, we're going to do a great thing, blah, blah, blah. And then all of a sudden, it all started to go very cold, and then we were getting talked down and down and down. And so we got a little bit concerned about that. And then there was talk that a discrimination bill is going to be introduced next week. I mean, no consultation whatsoever. We started trying to get a hold of the Attorney General, Christian Porter. He won't talk to anyone. He's just not talking to anyone. No stakeholders, but he's talking to fellow parliamentarians. And so, you know, actually an opportunity came along and we had a piece on the front page of the West Australian saying Christian lobby loses faith in Porter. And blow me down, I got a phone call. Very quickly. And all of a sudden we got a meeting. And through a concerted action with a couple of other groups of a like mind, we've managed to delay that until probably September, the bill, and also opened up a very wide consultation window, still holding their feet to the fire saying consult, 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 because it hasn't fully happened yet. But we've had a preliminary meeting. He's been around and talked to a lot of parliamentarians and heard their concerns. Now, we had a very early stakeholder meeting with the people drafting the legislation. And that went really well. Like, we're a bit shocked at how good that was now. And we're trusting that there's a further meeting with people like us, with the attorney himself, in the coming weeks before that bill is finally drafted. Now, here's the difficulty. There's ways we can make this bill pretty good. There's inclusions you can put inside of it to say, yeah, it's a Religious Discrimination Act. It includes all these bonuses and it makes it quite useful. It addresses real concerns. When we go to the legislative drafters and when we call up the AG's office and the Prime Minister's office, and they're right on board. They're listening, they're writing it down, they're saying, that's great, we want to protect Israel folau. But then Christian Porter goes into the media and says something a little bit different. And so someone's going to get let down in August or September. Someone is. I don't know if it's us. And I don't know if it's the LGBT group. I don't know. And we're just trying to get clarity on exactly where that is. Certainly our meetings have been very constructive, very helpful, but occasionally we get spooked. And what we're doing is not only that engagement, but we're also, ACL's also able to be a little bit more, we rattle the chain a little bit sometimes, and that's why we do the media as well. So we're trying to do that double-pronged. So do pray about that continually. There is real opportunity, but the game is not over yet, that's for sure.
Can I just say to that I know that Equality Australia have been telling all of their followers to get to meet face-to-face with parliamentarians and to put their case over, and to say that religion has got to be pushed down and dealt with in that way. My point to you is this, and it goes back to a bit to what Steve began with to begin with, is stop hanging around Bunnings and get on with the work of standing up for the gospel. Get on with getting out there, arranging to meet your parliamentarians. You know, there's lots of different templates for all sorts of different issues up here. But we've got to turn off my kitchen rules, whatever it is, you know, and start saying, actually, Lord, this is your time. This is our time. We were created for such a time as this. We've got to stand up and speak into this place too. Because let me tell you, everybody else is doing that.
What he said.
What do we say to those who make the point that some people have an imbalance of either male or female hormones and can't help but be homosexual? That might be one for you, Elizabeth, is it?
Yes, sorry. Unless you have something to say about that.
Go for it.
No.
Look, I mean, you know, people have all sorts of different discretions and imbalances of their hormones. I do know a lot about polycystic ovarian syndrome or disorder, you know, and it is a hormonal thing. I think the biggest challenge in the midst of all of this, it's not about the hormonal side of things, because we know we can find different ways to be able to help people with that. One of the greatest arguments is this whole thing of the intersex. And I know I'm slightly going to have to question, but the fact of the matter is we can regulate things hormonally today in a way that we haven't been able to previously. And also, people may be, I meet some incredibly camp guys, and I think, oh yeah, definitely. And they go, well, my wife and my 14 children, I'm thinking, whoa, you're married before you, whatever it is. And what happens is, you know, he has been deeply affirmed in his masculine identity. He just happens to come across as being quite effeminate, and maybe is very, very creative. So I think we've got to be really careful about putting people into boxes. On the intersex side of things, you know, if some guy's XXY chromosome, and I've met quite a number of people, a number of men who are, they've often said to me, would you please tell the general population that I might well be infertile, but I'm still a man. You know, just because I'm intersex, and most people who are intersex, if you like, they hate being part of the LGBTQI thing. Basically, they feel they're being absolutely used and abused just to fit into adding another letter to the alphabet soup. So look, on the whole hormonal thing, there's lots of research out there on this. I would say this, as ever, do 360 degrees research. Because where it says that, yes, this must be all the reasons why people are homosexual, as I said to you earlier, there are just too many stories out there with every single case where people say they're born gay, where there's proof that people aren't born gay.
The Mayer and McHugh report that I had up there as well goes through a lot of the scientific studies that have, and it's quite a balanced report. So Paul McHugh was the chief psychiatrist at Johns Hopkins University Hospital for a long time, and he's the principal author on the report, but then it's been checked by Lawrence Mayer, who's a homosexual academic. So it's quite a balanced report, and it really just goes through the studies, what they say, what their limitations are, what we know from them, what we can't tell from them. And so if you wanted to look specifically into hormones as a predeterminant of a homosexual identity, then the evidence is there. But their conclusion is really that there isn't very strong evidence that there is any prenatal determination that results from hormones, and that we're still left with this idea of why do you then necessarily need to live out a certain life trajectory on the basis of that.
I'll just add one thing. I wanted to say this before, but waited, but it keeps coming up in my head. At the start, we said, what about those people who sincerely believe that, homosexuality is not, wrong to practice it, and here again, what about those who say that there's a particular makeup in some people, etc. There is, and I mentioned before that we can't lose sight of some of the general principles. I was thinking of a general principle, and I think this goes to the very heart of one of the biggest theological mistakes or worldview mistakes that's plaguing us at the moment, and it's particularly plaguing younger people. The question is this, and I said this to a liberal theologian I had coffee with. I said, what is right and good and true? Is it you? Is it self? Or is it in fact outside of self? And unfortunately we have promoted the gospel of self to such a degree that people have lost sight of the simple fact that after the fall there is not one single compliment given to the human race in the entire Bible. Every single page is negative feedback. Everything from, reprobate minds, to quote the King James Version, to dead in trespasses and in sins, to righteousnesses as filthy rags, and enmity with God. It just goes on, and that none does righteously, no, not one. We lose sight of the fact that actually the liberation that comes in Christ is at its heart a liberation from the self. And there's a deep, generally applicable theological point that we've completely lost. He said, love yourself, affirm yourself, live your best self. I saw a billboard outside Canberra Airport the other day, master the artistry of you. Haters gonna hate, don't let them judge you, follow your dreams. I say, well, Hitler followed his dreams. Did a great job at it too for a while. What's the problem? The self ain't good. And if we just remember that front and centre, it answers a lot of those questions. What's true? What's right? Where's liberty? Where's peace? Where's love? Where's freedom? It's in the truth, which isn't me. And that's just a general point to make.
Yeah, very good. Very good. People dislike Christians for their lack of environmental policy or mental health advocacy for the homosexual community. Is it the Christian's job to rectify this? Who's going to jump on that one?
I'll say one thing. I think the gospel is mental health advocacy, and we do a heck of a lot of that. Who's the Prince of Peace? Jesus. And look, but I take the point entirely. Maybe someone else wants to add anything specific.
Look, the environmental thing is look, at the end of the day, and it goes back to truth, not what is truth, but who is truth. You know, when I was there in the midst of my long-term gay relationship, committed to the Girl Scout at the time, somebody didn't come up to me and say to me, your lifestyle is wrong, etc. This guy said to me, do you want more love in your life? I ask you the same question. If the answer is no, put your hand up. His question was spot on. Do you want more love in your life? He says, I'm going in search for some of it. Come with me. And I went in search with him for it. And what happened as a result of that, and you saw I said either Jesus redeemed me from things, or there's a number of major issues, particularly addictions, that have either lessened or just gone from my life. You know, where I was suicidal and depressed and cut off from myself and men and women, it's no longer the case. That's the mental health side of things. But also what happens is when we begin to really know ourselves and look after ourselves, we know the environment and we look after the environment, coming back onto that point. It's all an inside job that starts with one outside of ourselves who says, you decrease, let me increase. And therefore the whole of my creation will come into place. But you've got to put the creator into the central place first of all. And that's why, ladies and gentlemen, and I include myself in this, we need to speak our stories more and more and more and more. You need to know what Jesus has done for you and to speak what he's done, and stop being apologetic, or don't apologise at all. Say, well, this is the reality of my life. This is what Jesus has done for me. I'd love to hear what he's done for you. And if he's done nothing, well, maybe come and join me on the journey. Let's find some more love together.
In case you thought we forgot about you, Lisa, there is one for you as well. With the Nordic model of prostitution, won't the industry just be driven underground?
Yeah, that's a very common question for that's also used for the to push legalizing prostitution, because we want to. The purpose for legalizing is to protect them, usually if it's a good purpose, but our answer to that is, well, it's always underground. It's never going to be, even if it's in brothels. What we see is, it's probably the best point that can be brought up, but I think the demand side of it is what we need to look at, because maybe the few brothels that stay, well, this is not really the truth, but maybe we could regulate them better, but what happens, because demand spikes so much, the illegal industry grows tremendously. And so, no, it does not lead to a decrease in hidden prostitution. It leads to an increase in hidden prostitution as well as in visible prostitution. And it also, I think, do you have anything to add there?
Yeah, perhaps I could just add, we lived in Victoria in 1984 when the government there legalised prostitution. The police said there are 50 brothels operating in Victoria, we need to do something about this. So they legalised it. Today there are 100 legal brothels, but 400 illegal ones, right? Now, when I was in Sweden, I raised that question with the police that we were talking to about the prostitution legislation there. I said, what do you say to people who say it all does it drives it underground? And he said, I always have my car keys, I put them on the table. I said, you show me one brothel in Sweden. He said, nobody's ever picked up the key because they can't find one. And he said, if they're so far underground that nobody can find them, well, they won't get any business, so it doesn't matter. The notion of underground, that an industry can be underground, is actually a furphy. Because have any of you ever seen a Bunnings underground anywhere? Wouldn't they get a terrific amount of business if nobody knew where it was? I mean, it's crazy. It's totally crazy. It's simply a nonsense. It's actually a furphy. It's a question that people ask, but like Lisa said, prostitution to some extent is always underground because people don't sort of, in legal places they do, but say in Western Australia, you don't see prostitution here blazoned on the shop front, but it might be massage parlours sort of used as euphemisms. Hey, that is underground already, in a sense.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to say as well. If the clients will have to be able to find the people in prostitution, otherwise there's no prostitution, and so the police can find them as well, and so it's not really hidden. But I think what the purpose of the question is, will it be more dangerous prostitution? No, we will just target demand, get less human trafficking, and get less, I guess, prostitution overall is what I would say to that.
Behind that question is the premise that if it's not underground and it's properly regulated, that it's not as damaging to the women who are involved. And I think that's a lie that we need to tackle, because while we're trying to say, oh, well, let's make it better for the, prostitution's a constant in human history, so what we want to do is to make it better for the women who are involved in that. Well, that's a bit like saying, look, we're going to beat you with this baseball bat, but we're just going to pad it a little bit so that it doesn't hurt you so much. It's actually ignoring that what they're doing is inherently damaging, and sanitising the conditions and making sure that there isn't mould in the bedroom where they're working is a very marginal difference when you're actually looking at the scale of something which is buying somebody else. This is a terrible thing. You can't make it better and dress it up so that it looks nice.
One last question. There's others, but we can't get to all of them. This is asking you to, I guess, look into the future. How long do you expect it will be before the transgender concept is recognised as arrant nonsense? Well, that was a good one to finish on. Studied the whole paneling to silence, have we?
Well, I'd love to say next week, because some people are waking up and thinking, oh my goodness, this is crazy stuff. You actually have to be very bright and have a degree in gender studies to be able to believe this nonsense. It's really so counter to common sense. They're playing an interesting game with the transgender movement. They're moving very quickly, and they're doing that in the hope that they can overwhelm us before we realise what's upon us. But it's a gamble, because it also means that we're not warming up to the idea gradually, that the frog isn't boiling slowly. We could jump out of the water if they move too fast. And that's what I'm hoping will happen. I am embarrassed, really, to think that I will have to explain to my grandchildren that, yes, I lived there in the time when we were debating stupid questions about whether or not boys were different to girls. It's such a kindergarten question. But, and I look forward to being embarrassed and saying that it's all a thing of the past. But that really does depend on how people respond to their agenda, I think.
Right. Look, I said that was going to be the last question, but there's just one here, which there's some anonymous question. Our son is gay. Besides loving him unconditionally, is there any council group who he can talk to that is pro-Christian? James, that's probably an important one.
We're talking about going underground. I think just about many groups are, and a number of years ago, I'd probably say even a couple of decades ago, there were probably about 8 or 9 different groups that would reach out into this area across Australia. I think at last count we were about 3 or maybe 4. This is where, say, mainstream church needs to take some ownership on the whole issue of sexuality generally. Whoever wrote that question, come and see me, you can have my number. And look, I'm excited about these times at the moment, and maybe this isn't a bad way to end, because Jesus Christ truly is the hope of the world. You know, he is the answer and the response to absolutely every trauma, every tragedy, every difficulty that we have out there. He really, really is. It's just whether or not we're willing to step in and walk this journey with him as well. But certainly as of late, there have been a group of us have been meeting, a number of us are here today, who've left behind the LGBTQIP plus 2S lifestyle. And you laugh every time I say that, don't you? I know. But we've left behind the lifestyle, and this isn't about a gay to straight thing. This is about a lost to found thing. A lost to say, this is about wherever your life's at, the direction is holiness. But we need the rest of the church to be doing that. But all I'd say is this is if you think about me, don't just pray for me, pray for all those of us in this nation who really want to be able to respond to young men like this. And I'd say this to the parents of this young man, assuming he's a young man, and it's also something for all of us. Is and it's what Joseph Nicolosi often pushed out, and it's very much Jesus' ministry. Jesus gives us his attention. He looks us in the eye and sees us. He gives us words of affirmation. He didn't condemn anybody. He said, I came to save you, not to judge you and condemn you. And the third thing is this, is he permitted himself to be touched and he touched. He was very healthy around affection. And every one of us needs a good dose of attention, affection and affirmation. And that brings about a greater sense of our acceptance and understanding of who we are before the Father himself. That's why Jesus is so darn attractive. We need to learn to be practicing that a lot more among ourselves as Christians. We need to ensure that we're lobbying, that we've got spaces for that. And then let me tell you, whatever people's sexuality or gender identity, etc. is, they'll want to come to us rather than go and spend their money on some app or some bar or wherever it is, because they'll realise that we've got the real deal.